Hello, this is Dr. Joel B. Gooden, and I'm going to talk about what the dissertation is. It's a conversation between me and Lori. So it's going to be pretty casual, but we're going to try to do like a 45-minute-ish discussion. And I didn't plan it, so it may be all over the place. Generally, who does a dissertation? Any doctoral student. Who? All right. What is it? All right. It is a manuscript, a really big paper. That is written about a research project done by the student with guidance from professors. Okay. When? I'll do the who, what, when, where, why. When they do this, typically after their courses are completed. So they take psychology, a cognitive psychology course, and a history and systems course, or whatever, all the courses they take, and then sometimes it overlaps. All right. Who, what, when, where? Well, that's online or in person. Why? It's the final piece or step, not pieces, or step in obtaining the doctorate. PhD, EDD, and a lot of fields do it, even like a doctorate, a DNP in nursing, etc. They all do it different ways. So and dissertating, I'm not sure is like a real word, but basically for me, it means doing the dissertation. So generally, you write 5 chapters. Sometimes some programs have you write only 3, the first 3, which is typically a proposal. Other programs have different variations, So what is in the 5 chapters? First, chapter 1 is an introduction to the entire dissertation. So this is like in a book of fiction. It's for like the first chapter in a book of fiction. It introduces the characters and the dynamics and all the stuff you need to know to read the rest. In a dissertation, chapter 1 is basically is the start of the plan. or what is called the proposal. So generally, the dissertation, book, or manuscript has 5 chapters, as I've said. The first 3 make up the proposal. And it really is here's the study I want to do. And it works chronologically. So the proposal, aka DP or dissertation proposal, comes before chapter 4 and 5 because it implicitly, basically just by virtue of it being a proposal, has to come before it is approved. So you can't start collecting data or writing chapters 4 and 5 until your committee approves your proposal. Okay. You can ask me whatever questions you have.
Okay.
Okay. Chapters 4 and 5 don't have a special name put together. They are added to the what was the DP, chapters 3 and 4, chapters 1 through 3. And when all chapters are put together, we often call it the DM or dissertation manuscript.
Okay.
The DM is the finished or completed dissertation. If approved, the person that wrote it will be a doctor, whatever specialty. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate a little bit on proposal?
Well, it's called a proposal because you're sorry, somebody's trying to get into my apartment from the above apartment. Proposal is literally that. You ask somebody, just like a marriage proposal, will you do this? And they say yes or no. Of course, when you write the first 3 chapters of your dissertation, you're writing them with the guidance. You write this with the guidance of your committee so that you are pretty sure they'll say yes or approved, right? Just like you date somebody typically before you give them a marriage proposal, and you kind of get the feeling they're going to say yes, hopefully, before you start proposing. the same thing. I believe we should never set students up for like, no, that's not going to work. But sometimes if they're not doing what we say and they write all 3 chapters and they're just bullying their way, so to speak, forward, and that would not be, if we don't think they have a good plan for how to do a research study that would be worthy of a dissertation, then we might say, you haven't been doing what we've asked. No, this won't work. So I should probably elaborate on worthy of a dissertation. But did that make sense what I said about proposal?
Mm-hmm. So you don't begin collecting the data, you're not supposed to, until chapters 1 through 3 are approved. Is that correct?
You don't collect, yeah. So when I say worthy of a dissertation, I'm saying you're doing research and the dissertation is writing a detailed account of that plan, process, and findings.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the dissertation is. It's less about the writing and more about what the writing represents. Okay, all the things it represents, process, and everything you should have learned while doing it. So what should you have learned? Generally, critical thinking, scholarly writing, expert level research skills. Those are really the 3 things I think you should get out of writing. Of course, I guess the other thing is some specific content knowledge on the topic of your dissertation. So chapter 1, as I said, is an introduction to chapters 1 through, to chapters 2 through 5. You start with a mini introduction to the context of the study you are doing. But generally, when students are writing this section, they don't know the details of their study yet.
Mm-hmm.
So this is refined as they progress. They may go back and fix, revise. the biggest cornerstone of any dissertation comes right after the introduction of chapter 1. Thus, it's the second section of the dissertation.
Will you fix that right, please?
Yes. Thank you. So what's the problem? The problem is a research problem. It's not, well, I don't have enough money to pay rent. The problem, or research, we call it a research problem. It is a research problem because researchers have said this is an issue that needs to be addressed, that is research related. No, they probably didn't use those exact words, but they said as much. They said it's an issue, or they said it needs to be studied, or both.
How do people pick their topic?
Good. I'll get to that.
Okay.
How do people pick their topic? When a researcher writes an article, and often in the last part, discussion section of their article, they say something like X, fill in the blank, right? X needs to be better understood, or X deserves more research, or we do not yet fully understand how X is related to Y, whatever they're saying. That is evidence or support that there is a research problem. What students need to do first in any, all caps still, in any dissertation is determine what the problem is. One piece of evidence is not sufficient. They need to find a convergence. Multiple people in their articles calling for it. I normally suggest 15 pieces of evidence. The evidence should be current. It should be
Correct.
from the past 3 years.
Okay.
Because by the time you complete your dissertation, approximately 2 more years, your literature should mostly be no more than 5 years old. Especially the lit that says research is needed on this problem. Why? If it's 10 or 20 years old, the problem is likely to have been solved or addressed by other articles or dissertations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you find people in the year 2000, right now it's 2023, if you find people that wrote about, hey, we really need some research on these microplastics, they're causing issues, or if only there were a way to like have a car that wasn't built on gasoline, fueled by gas, like that's old now.
Right.
It's no longer as substantial a problem, at least. And whatever the problem is really the cutting edge or the edge of the research that has been done to date up until today. So what you want to find is what the most recent researchers and this gets to your question, your area of interest, say they've studied and discovered their findings, and what they say needs to be studied next. Perhaps they've studied they've identified the cells that cause aging, but have, that I think I was reading, every day I read like some article that basically says, well, scientists are one step closer to figuring out how to reverse aging, like in the skin or whatever. Perhaps they've identified the cells that cause aging, but have not yet determined how the cells work, the mechanisms within the cell that ultimately might need to be stopped or reversed somehow. So find the cutting edge of the research in your area of interest. And that gets to your question, how do people pick their topic? Interest and passion and proof. Okay. I want to study why people drive slowly
In the left-hand
the
lane.
left lane of traffic
Yes.
may not work for your field of study or for any field. Is it unique or novel? Is it cutting edge? Most scholars, professors, agree that dissertations should be something new. Like research that has not yet been done. So a dissertation is a unique study that the student identifies, plans, and implements. I often use, I don't know if this is a Southern thing, I'm really not a fisherman, but I often use the idea of fishing in ponds or lakes. For identifying a research problem. In many ways, a research problem comes to you, the student, rather than you finding the problem. Here's what I mean. Your area of interest, passion, is like a lake or pond. You can choose to fish in it anywhere you want. Will you catch a fish? Maybe. So fishing is like searching with keywords in your library. And the recent research, you might find a research problem, a fish that emerges as if to say, I'm on your hook. Eat me, use me, eat whatever. The metaphor is eat me. In other words, if you have fished, searched the lid in your area of interest, and you find a convergence of evidence, 15 pieces or sources of researchers saying something like, each one saying this problem should be researched.
Like perhaps if ivermectin is an antidote to COVID-19, there's always back and forth on that, that and hydroxychloroquine. There's not enough evidence to support whether or not those two medications can help the symptoms of COVID, but there's just not been enough.
Yeah, if there's not enough evidence, they're going to say that. They're going to say, and that would be if I were in that field as a dissertation doctoral student, I would say, hey, I could study that. I could look into that, especially if people in 2022, 23 are saying we just don't know enough to say whether this is an efficacious, efficient, effective treatment consistently. You don't want just like one anecdotal story of whoever, and it worked for them. Okay, great. But does it work 99% of the time or like 50% of the time? 50% of the time you grow fish gills. That's not good. We don't want fish gills in 50%. So what do we, this problem should be researched. So you want 15 people to separately be saying this. Articles, I shouldn't say people, because sometimes articles are written by groups of people.
Right.
Are separately suggesting something about the problem is a problem and should be researched. So some might just say this is a problem. Some might say this should be researched. So they're gonna, you sort of weave it together. A concise synthesis summary. Synthesize means sort of woven together, where you'll have people that basically said the same thing. These people said it needs to be researched. These people said this other thing. And you sort of, you synthesize it together. Synthesis summary of what the researchers have said regarding the problem as a problem needing to be researched. And by what I mean by as a problem, you may think it's a problem. That's not sufficient for a dissertation. Bonus here, the rigor or rules or level or requirements for a dissertation are more or harder and different than an article that a professor with tenure might study and publish. Dissertations are meant to show foundational expertise in research. You do this by including a lot more detail on every decision you make compared to what a professor with a doctorate would have to do to get published. So this can be annoying or frustrating. It is also iterative, meaning back and forth. Don't count how many times you send your document drafts to your chair and or committee, because it's going to be a lot, over and over and over again. You'll send your draft of what you've worked on, and they'll send feedback on what you did. Then you'll revise, and they'll provide feedback on what you revised. Hold on, you'll revise and add new sections to your new draft, and they'll provide feedback on what you revised and added. This process of back and forth continues for what seems like forever.
Is there a limit to how many times, like how many
The notice
revisions?
of progress, one sentence, a page, or whatever at a time that you make. The limit, as you said, is only this. When the last words of chapter 5 are approved, you in addition to all previous words and chapters, you're finished. You and the committee will go through some overarching reviews of the paper in its entirety and add in little things, little pieces that might help to clarify sections, but you are essentially done. Imagine being in the last lap of a marathon, or
Been
the
there.
last leg of a long journey. You can see the finish line. The end of the dissertation defense is, if approved, is when you are first called Dr. So-and-so. After that, there's final revisions if needed. I've never asked for these, but they do happen. And then there's school paperwork, i.e. red tape, etc. Small things. I think I wrote it a lot in that section. We can sort of pare this down, but how do people pick their topic? And then we got to finishing the whole thing. So just try to wrap up sort of this discussion. Well, first I'll just ask you, what do you have so far in terms of reading this or hearing this?
Well, I mean, the overview is very clear. It's just getting to the meat and potatoes of each chapter is where I would obviously need to know a lot more.
Okay. So what's in it? I'll write this up here. We'll get to that in next session. But for now, let's look at the pieces, the big pieces. So chapter 1.
Introduction.
Problem. We talked about the problem. We need to talk more about the purpose, which is the study you will do, the goal of it, the framework, how you will interpret or measure the data, the lens. So it's like if I was giving a test, an essay, essay questions, and am I one of those professors that the more you write, the better grade I give? Or am I one that takes out points because of your spelling and grammar? Or am I looking at the content, really looking at it and saying, you don't understand this?
Mm-hmm.
How do I grade those essays?
Mm-hmm.
How do I get that A on that test or on those essay questions? Do I just write a lot? And sometimes you ask other students that have had that professor before and you say, so how do you do that? How did you get the grade you want? Oh, well, if you write a lot, that'll get you an A. And, we've all maybe had that person, but there are other people that are like, you have to show that you know it.
Mm-hmm.
That would be preferable. Harder, but preferable. That's true learning, right? Hopefully. Whereas writing a lot, you may not actually know what you're talking about. So this is how I'm deciding to measure that essay question. Well, maybe I've got interviews with participants about their religious cognitions and their lives. Well, I could study that in lots of ways. Resilience theories, motivation theories. I'm trying to think of I could look at meaning making theories, how we make meaning out of our lives. But for the study that you and I are involved with, we're using Bowlby's attachment theory and largely looking at how people have attached to their parents, their friends, their communities, their spiritual agents during their lives. That'll be one of our primary frameworks. In other words, the way that we're going to look at their data and focus in on that. Can you do it in more than one way? Yeah, but it takes a lot longer. So typically, dissertation students are encouraged to just have one framework. How are you going to measure this? Or are you going to look at it and categorize it and say, well, we're looking at this data in terms of attachment. Or you could look at it in terms of motivation. You're going to obviously focus in on different things depending on what framework or lens. I always imagine one of those detectives with a little spyglass, just looking at stuff, really, that's the lens, the framework. Purpose, framework, method, design. And this is sort of like, is it going to be an experiment or is it going to be like a qualitative, is it a case study where we're going to study this group of people or this, 10 people that all have had Parkinson's disease? And in the study that you and I are doing is a mixed method study So it has quantitative aspects and qualitative. So interviews and surveys that have numeric responses. Well, I always encourage students doing dissertations to avoid a mixed method study because it's a lot more work.
Yeah.
And so what I try to do with all my dissertation students is have them do a high quality study, but one that is doable in a shorter amount of time instead of making it overly complex. If we can get it complex enough to look good, but not have it be too much work that'll take years and years extra, then we're going to cut down on your tuition. We're going to have your dissertation be good enough to land you a job or whatever you're trying to do. And then you're going to be done and you won't have spent way too much money, hopefully. It's already way too much money probably, but we're going to try to make it not worse, right? Method design is like, are we doing an experiment or what's called a quasi-experiment, where we might look at things that are not a true experiment. We're not going to put people in control and treatment groups. They might already be naturally. Well, let's look at how older people above 65 differ from people below 65. Okay, well, those are natural groups. And one's not necessarily a treatment group or control group, but they're natural groups that exist. And so that'd be quasi-experimental, perhaps. And then based on the analyses we're doing, we might. And the design, if it's qualitative, we'd have all sorts of different options: phenomenological, case study, a basic or descriptive design, ethnographic. And if it's quantitative, it might be an experiment, a quasi-experiment, correlational study. So lots of different options depending on how you want to approach the issue, but also how best to approach the issue. This involves who you can access.
Do you generally know which method you're going to use from the beginning, or can that change throughout your writing of chapters?
Say that again, please.
Like the method of how you're going to test your research, is that something people generally know from the get-go, how they're going to proceed with that, or is it something that could change throughout the course of chapters 1, 2, 3?
Alexa, stop. Alexa, stop.
55 p.m. alarm stopped on Joel's Echo Dot.
Also, there's somebody trying to come into the room, so we may switch over to that here in just a sec.
Okay.
I'm gonna press record and close this up. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question. Now, the method generally doesn't change. You might tweak it as you move on. You might realize, oh, well, I really need to do it this way instead. But generally, we come up with a really good plan in chapter 1 and follow through with it. Method, design, terms, that's not a big part, but just basic terms that people may not know. Significance of the study. Why is it important? And then there's a summary of the chapter. That's chapter 1. So we'll go to chapter 2 next, which is theory and literature. Chapter 3, which is more about methods, designs, recruitment, processes. Chapter 4, which is results and evaluation of them. in chapter 5, which is implications of the results, findings, and then practical implications and future research suggestions. That's the gist of the whole thing. And so here we identify a foundation for doing the study. This is why the study is needed and how we'll do it, start to identify how we'll do it. And we build up our level. A lot of people do chapter 2 first, and that's a good idea actually in many cases. But once you have your idea, you have to do a full, become an expert with everything that people are saying, so that you can be very informed as you proceed. Then you go into details about exactly how you're going to do the study, get the data, analyze the data. Then you're going to have your data, you're going to write out the data results and sort of start to evaluate it. And then in chapter 5, you're going to get into the big picture of how that relates back to the literature in chapter 2, how it relates back to the theory, and really sort of analyzing that data in chapters 4 and 5 and making sort of bigger conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll come back to that. But I think that's a good place to
Great start.
stop for today.